Hey guys, again, you're going to have to deal with the whirring of the space heater going on in the background of this video, or at least the on-camera parts of it. Don't worry, this should hopefully be the last time we have to deal with this. It's supposed to start warming up by the end of this week. So, again, hopefully it'll be the last time in a while we have to deal with it. Okay, let's start the episode. In 1949, Harlequin Enterprises was founded by Richard Bonnycastle as a means to keep his print shop open during down times. Harlequin would survive mainly by reprinting the works of the likes of Agatha Christie, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Somerset Maugham. That was until 1954 when Richard's wife Mary took over the company and began steering into a new direction into what the company would best become known for: publishing romance novels.
Now then, romance novel can have kind of a varied meaning. You have your classical books like the works of Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters. You have your boundary pushers like Love in the Time of Cholera. And yes, you even have your more contemporary fare like, say, the 50 Shades series. But usually when one conjures the image of a romance novel, the sight of Fabio embracing a young ingenue surrounded by various purple prose is generally what comes to mind.
By the 1970s, Harlequin would become the premier publisher of romance novels, with their creative talent pool spreading throughout North America, Africa, Asia, even Australia. In fact, today's story is actually set in the land down under. Can't you hear the thunder? And that in turn kind of leads us into the history of romance comics.
As World War II came to an end, returning soldiers began looking for more sophisticated fare than your average superhero book that they had been reading during the war. To that end, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, yes, the same duo that created Captain America, debuted Young Romance for Crestwood Publications. Other publishers would follow suit, like Charlton's Romantic Secrets, DC Secret Hearts, and Quality's Heartthrobs. Then the implementation of the Comics Code in the 1950s caused many of these books to begin pivoting mainly towards adolescent girls for their fare. It's here where you saw Marvel titles like Patsy Walker and Millie the Model joining the fray.
And much like romance novels, romance comics do kind of apply to a lot of genres, not just one single solitary form. I mean, technically, if you think about it, a lot of Archie comics are romance comics. I mean, stuff like Betty and Veronica, their solo titles. Even Sabrina the Teenage Witch kind of falls more into the romance category.
However, as time moved on and gender roles in society began to change, the idea of making comics for women based solely on the idea of falling in love and getting married started to fall out of favor. Romance comics would slowly fade out over time, but they would never really go away. There's already the aforementioned Archie books, and then there's Terry Moore's Strangers in Paradise, which ran from 1993 to 2007, with a miniseries in 2018. And of course, manga has continued to be a vehicle for many romantic stories, many of which are also targeted towards a younger female audience.
Which brings us full circle, as today we're covering a manga adaptation of a Harlequin romance novel from 1974 by Rachel Lindsay. Now, if you know my history with manga on this show, unfortunately that tends to bring up a lot of copyright problems, and in order to try to avoid that, you're going to see these cat pictures in the middle of everything, so hopefully it's transformative enough to avoid any copyright problems. Again, hoping. Anyway, this is Harlequin Romance, A Question of Marriage.
Aurora Templeton sits by a swimming pool enjoying a fruity beverage when her vacation is interrupted by a phone call from her father. He's decided to sell the family home and will just sail around the world on his yacht. Aurora is a tiny bit upset, as this is the home that she grew up in, and she had often longed for the place, especially after her mother had passed away when she was young. Still, she's an adult and moved out a while ago, so there couldn't be anything to really worry about. save for the collection of personal diaries she had kept since she was 12.
Diaries are what we used to call blogs. Back in those days, you didn't actually have a computer. You had to actually write them down on paper.
Knowing that she can't possibly risk having her personal moments be revealed to strangers, Aurora rushes back home and her job reading local weather reports on the radio. Her co-worker Neil notices that she's still able to do her job, though she seems distracted by something. Aurora decides to contact the new owner of the house to see if she can search the mansion for a few items, not specifically mentioning the diaries. It turns out the new owner is a physics professor by the name of Luke Kerwin, and she calls his office.
Someone on a teacher's salary being able to afford a palatial mansion? This really does take place in a foreign country.
One tiny problem. Professor Kerwin is currently out of town, so when Aurora calls in, all she gets is a cold reception from the secretary, Ms. Hiller. This leaves her no other choice but amateur burglary. Aurora still has the key to the home and is able to make her way inside. She heads towards the sitting room where her diaries are kept in a hidden fireplace compartment. She startles a cat and winds up waking up none other than Mr. Kerwin, who realizes there's now a stranger in his new home. Aurora tries to run, but Kerwin pursues her and manages to tackle her. She fights him off and escapes, however Luke fails to get much sleep afterwards, thinking that the incident is part of some teenage crime spree. The next day at school, Luke talks with his fellow instructor Jack about everything, including the fact that the burglar had a very particular scent of perfume, which has led him to deduce that this was a young woman breaking into his home and not one of the boys who had been doing so as part of the crime spree.
Luke had an incident while trying to climb Mount Everest that resulted in him being snowbound for a number of days. And when he was eventually found, he ended his engagement and then took another vacation to the west coast of Australia to cool things down and collect his thoughts for a while. He bought the mansion in order to follow through with the marriage. However, even though he's not getting married, he's still going to move in, and he's now throwing a housewarming party.
Coincidentally, one of the people invited is Neil, Aurora's co-worker, who it turns out is also Luke's former university roommate. He actually asks Aurora there to be his date, but it's strictly to make sure his ex-girlfriend gets jealous. Still, it's another opportunity for Aurora to get her diaries, so she leaps at the chance. Hours later, the two arrive at the party fashionably late, and the jealousy ploy actually works as it's revealed that Neil's ex-girlfriend is none other than Miss Hiller, Kerwin's secretary. This leaves Aurora the chance to scope out Luke, and he soon spots her, offering her a chance to dance, but she uses some giggling schoolgirls as a distraction to go try to retrieve her diaries.
You have to remember, this is technically taking place in the 1970s, so a teacher inviting students to his home wasn't as problematic as it would look like today.
As she slips away, it's then that Luke notices a familiar perfume scent coming from Aurora. Somehow, by the time she reaches the sitting room, Luke is there waiting for her. He wants to know why exactly it is that she keeps sneaking into his house, and he locks her in the room to go deal with the rest of the party. On the plus side, this does allow Aurora to grab her diaries from the fireplace compartment and hide them in her purse, which she then drops out of the window. Luke comes back and begins wondering about Aurora as she gets around to telling the truth as to who she is and that she just wants to get something personal. He apologizes as he's been the target of way too much flirting from the female students, and he was just grouping her in with that lot. She finally admits that she was looking for her diaries as he calls a taxi for her to go home. Of course, she soon doubles back to the mansion to try to retrieve her purse, which is full of the diaries, only to discover that Luke has already found them. She's forced to call him at the school the next day, where he reveals that he flipped through some of the pages, and he'll only turn them back over in exchange for a date. We've received some breaking news here at the Sleepy Cat Wrestling Event Center. As many of you know, Anya the Laplanders won the Rumble for the second year in a row. However, unlike last year, she has opted not to challenge for either ladies' championship at Grapple Sanity. Instead, the Laplanders will challenge for the ladies' Cosmic Tag Team Championships. This means that the next show will include an unprecedented 3 Expulsion Closet matches, 2 women's and 1 men's. This means that the winner of the match between Eileen Burbett, Steffi Love, Dame Tart, Riley Carpenter, the Cute Adventurous Librarian, and Sydney Maxwell will challenge that vile temptress, the undefeatable Doreen Squirrel, for the Z-Top Crown Championship. Meanwhile, the winner of the match between J.B. Fletcher, Sophie Driscoll, Little Rita of the West, Raven Orlando, Joan d'Arc, and Vanessa Swan will challenge the Stunt Granny for the Ladies' Cosmic Championship. The men's Cosmic Championship will be on the line as the disciplinarian defends his championship against former champions Solitaire Rose of the Anti-Pie Alliance, King Vitamin of the Charlatans of Destruction, the monstrous being known to all as the Hugmaster, Roman, and the Man with No Socks. More news as it arrives.
No, you're the one trying to unnecessarily pad out the video in order to appease the mighty YouTube algorithm.
With no other choice, Aurora accepts Luke's offer for a date, secretly mumbling to herself to plan the best date ever. On the date, she winds up taking Luke to an arcade, which is a place that is completely unfamiliar to him. Still, he manages to have fun facing Aurora at a racing game and then doing some virtual boxing. None of this is going to Aurora's plan, as she was hoped that he would actually be bored by all of this. She soon asks to go home, and he admits that he actually does harbor some feelings for her, and says some weird passages about longing for a person and wanting to take care of her. He then soon turns over the diaries. The two then kiss, which arouses some feelings of confusion in Aurora. As she begins to ponder whether or not she truly reciprocates Luke's affections, Aurora approaches Neil at work to learn more about Luke. Neil mentions that Luke was a total ladies' man in college, never seeming to settle down for just one girl. However, it seems that maybe now he's changed his ways, given that he's engaged, and not to mention he just bought that mansion.
And with that, kids, we have now officially reached the third act breakup.
Distraught, Aurora chastises herself for even considering that Luke's motives were pure. She storms into his office at school and loudly confronts him, and he explains that he ended his engagement, leading to Aurora running off in embarrassment. This arouses suspicion in Luke's co-worker Jack, who finally confronts Luke about everything, and Luke confesses that he's been looking for love with passion, which is something that he senses in Aurora. Feeling that he owes Aurora an explanation, Luke visits her in her apartment a few hours later and explains that he's ended the engagement and that he had always gone through life just kind of waiting for love to fall into his lap. He was a total workaholic who just thought things would work out if he worked hard enough. Then, when he got snowbound in a blizzard for 3 days, it made him slowly realize that he really knew nothing about love at all and had just been stringing his fiancée along. So Luke ended the relationship, feeling that he needed to try to find someone who felt the same way he did, who felt as lonely as he did, as powerless as he did over everything, because he had realized that, well, again, things just don't work out in a simplistic way. Aurora screams that Luke really has no idea what love is and kicks him out. She grumbles to herself that Luke was probably just using a pickup line as she begins flipping through her diaries. As she begins going through them, she begins to realize there's truly nothing salacious contained within the pages of these works. It's just merely the naive musings of a stupid teenage girl. That is, until she finds her first diary, the one she began writing after her mother's death when her father had shipped her off to boarding school. Aurora begins reading passages of her feelings of abandonment at that age. How they worsened when her father skipped out on a visit during various school functions. It's then that she realizes that this must have been the diary that Luke had flipped through earlier, when he talked about wanting to protect her, wanting to save her, wanting her to feel good, the feelings of loneliness. This was what he was talking about. She begins to actually develop feelings for Luke. She rushes back to his home, and the two embrace while confessing their love for each other.
And so concludes Harlequin Romance, A Question of Marriage. I don't know why they called it A Question of Marriage. They don't get married at the end. Anyway, how was the story? Well, I like the artwork in this. I think the artwork suits the, theme and story you're kind of going for. You're adapting a romance novel, and the sort of wispy, pencil etchings kind of feel like, what you think of when you think of the prose of a romance novel. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the compliments end. This is really short. The book it's adapted from is about, I've seen, between 187 to 200 pages. And this one's not even 120. It feels missing. Like, it's so short that it results in very flat characterization and characters that are just not particularly interesting. Like, I think there's some interesting ideas for backstories, but those backstories are all crammed into, 2 panels on 1 page. And again, this is a graphic storytelling medium. This is visual. Show, don't tell. We shouldn't have had him sitting there. We shouldn't have had Luke explaining what happened on Mount Everest, or Aurora reading her diary and realizing that Luke was reciting actual passages from it. They should have shown these things. We should have shown Aurora writing her book in boarding school and that stuff, so that you start to see how this is going to lay in. And it doesn't work that way. I think they just directly copied the text. And even then, they didn't really do that because, like I said, the actual novel is much longer. So it just doesn't work. And I don't, if someone, who likes romance stories, wanted to read romance comics, there are better examples out there.
And one more thing. I can't entirely confirm this, but I think there is a grander narrative going on here. I'm not entirely sure. There wasn't a lot of background information on this book at all when I was looking up research for this. I basically found the listing under two kind of subtitles. The first was a ordinary paperback, which had the Australians, and of course this graphic interpretation has the diary love connection. So again, this might be part of a grander narrative. I can't completely tell. And in a way, that can also be listed as something of a failure, because if this is part of a grander narrative, it doesn't do a good job of introducing the characters, especially if you're coming in the middle, and the supporting characters just aren't there for a grander narrative. I mean, again, this thing is called A Question of Marriage, but no one gets married or engaged. In fact, the only thing close to a marriage that happens is, of course, Luke broke his engagement in his backstory. So, again, it really does not do a very good job at telling this story whatsoever. Okay, so now let's get back to wrapping things up.
Again, there's Strangers in Paradise, True Story Swear to God. The Sabrina the Teenage Witch manga I've reviewed on the show a couple of times, I think would all fall more into the category of the type of romance you would be looking for than is this. Again, there's plenty of also romance manga as well, so this just doesn't really work. I'm going to have to give Harlequin Romance A Question of Marriage an F. There's just no reason to really read this at all. It's not even like it's so bad it's good. It's just dull. And with that, let's see what we're doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can support my work at patreon.com/CP Time for Cat Productions, where you can even request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can be notified for further videos.